Okay, right, thank you. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. So, the title of the shir tonight, Chayei, balancing completion with continuity. Now, the image at the top of the sheet is not a puzzle in the sense that I'm not asking you to spot the difference or something like that. I thought it would be a useful introduction to the shir. This little image represents a story that appears in, I think in Plutarch actually, the 1st century CE. And he relates the story, and you'll see how this is relevant to the key topic of the shir, of the king of Athens, whose name was Theseus. And Theseus rescues, according to the mythology, the children of Athens from King Minos, he of Minotaur. And they're so happy, and they celebrate this wonderful event by every year taking a ship, and that ship becomes the ship of Theseus. And every year the ship goes on the same journey that they went on to escape, that he took the children on to escape from this dangerous setting. They go to an island called Delos. Anyway, this happens year after year after year. They recreate every year the travel and the journey of this ship. The problem is eventually, after a number of years, the boards on the ship start rotting. And things start going wrong with the ship. And they have to replace parts of the ship. And they keep replacing the ship until eventually there is none of the remaining ship. There is none of the original ship left. And it is only new parts of the ship. And this creates a famous paradox, which is known as the ship of Theseus. Or Theseus's paradox. And what is the paradox? The paradox is, if no pieces remain of the original ship, is it still the ship of Theseus? Or is it no longer the ship of Theseus? And the reason why this is relevant to this parsha is because, as we will see, the key question we will seek to answer through this shir is this question. The question of, when there is the end of an era, there's a finality in this parsha, there is the passing of both Abraham and Sarah, what defines continuity? What is the definition of continuity? What is the definition of the next stage, the stage defined by Yitzchak and Rivka, the next stage in the story? And how is that a continuity of what came before? So we'll come back to the ship later, but that's the introduction. So we know that this parsha, and the beginning of the parsha, focuses on the sense of completion, the sense of a life well lived. And that is emphasized by a beautiful midrash, the Midrash Yelamdeinu. It's called so because of the words that are used. I think they're either used in the midrash or the midrash is understood to convey the sentiment of Yelamdeinu Rabbeinu, which means, may our teacher teach us. Limud is to learn, Lilmod is to learn. Yelamdeinu Rabbeinu is, may our teacher instruct us. And the midrash focuses on those first words in the parsha, Vayhiyu Chayei Sarah. And it was the life of Sarah, and you're familiar with many different ideas here, and why it is that the years are listed in a certain way. We're focusing on something which even comes and precedes even that. The Midrash says, Zeshehu Omer, source 1 on the sheet. Notesh Shomayim v'Yosei Eretz, that Hashem is the one who stretches out the heavens and founds the earth, v'Yotzei Ruach Odom B'Kirbo, and forms the spirit of mankind within a person. Says the Midrash, Shebashashu Nosin Ruach Ba'odom, when Hashem puts a spirit in mankind, Omelo, Hashem says to the spirit, Kach v'kach yihiyu mispar yomecha, such shall be the years of your life. And so we find that this is the reason why the years of the righteous are counted, are listed in the Torah, to inform them, or to perhaps to inform us, the time that Hashem had fixed for them, for their lives. And so it says, Basara, with Sarah, by Yehiyu Chayei Sarah, these were the years of Sarah's life. In other words, the emphasis of these are the years of Sarah's life is another paradox of life itself. And what gives the meaning to Sarah's life? The fact that she knows she won't be there forever. And that's the significance. Vayhiyu Chayei Sarah. Hashem says to the Ruach, to the Spirit, this is the time there is. This is the allotted time, and make the most of those years of that time. So we have this idea and this sense, and this is conveyed in other midrashim as well. There is a midrash Lekach Tov, which says that all her years were besimcha, Ubesason, remarkable, considering the challenges that Sarah went through in her life. She's Ubesimcha, but still, Vatama Sarah Bakiras Ar, but still she passes away, she dies, she reaches the end of her life. But Rashi, of course, introduces another element here which we're also familiar with, and that is, although Sarah is at an advanced age, there is a suddenness to her passing, a deep suddenness, a great shock even. Rashi tells us, Rashi is on the second pasuk in the parasha, Vatoma Sarah b'kiras Arba hi Chevron, that Sarah dies in Kiryat Arba hi Chevron, and the Canaan, Vayova Avram comes l'spot Sarah, to eulogize Sarah and to mourn for her. Says Rashi, v'nismacha, number 2, v'nismacha misas Sarah la'akedas Yitzchak. The reason why the passing of Sarah is placed in close proximity to the binding of Isaac to the Akedah, l'fisha alidei b'soras ha'akedah, because since and through the informing of the Akedah, shenes damein b'nolish shchita, that her son was prepared and ready and almost shechted on the altar, v'kimat shelo nishchat, and it was almost the case that he was not shechted. We'll come back to those words. Parcha nishmasa mimeno mesa, her soul left her and she died. And Rashi therefore introduces from here a very strong, familiar trend in the Medrash, which is that the juxtaposition of Sarah's passing to the Akedah tells us that it was as a result of that. That she heard that this had transpired, that her son had been, that the Akedah had taken place, and that caused her to pass away. One of the commentaries on Rashi, the Sifsei Chachamim, is a collection of different commentaries on Rashi. That's what it means, the mouth of the sages, the lips of the sages. I apologize, it's very small on the sheet. Number 3, comments and picks up on this unusual phrase, V'im Toma. And if you're going to ask the following question, V'kimat shenishchat havalei leminka. Rashi should have said, he was almost shechted. He was almost shechted, and that's what caused her to die. Rashi doesn't say that. What does Rashi say? V'kimat shelo nishchat. That he was almost not shechted. This is very strange. What is going on? Yeshlomi says you can answer as follows. Dahachi Perusha, this is the explanation. Shliach bo mehar ha-Moriah. An agent, a messenger came from Mount Moriah, and told Sarah, do you know what's just happened? Big news. The Akedah, and tells her the story. And he begins to tell her that her son had been ready to be shechted. But the person telling the story delayed to completing his words. And wasn't able to complete and say that he was saved and not shechted. And it was, the meaning of Rashi is, he had almost said to her that he was not killed. That the end of the story was, but don't worry, because in the end he wasn't killed. Tiny moment beforehand. And that's why she passed away. She died because he wasn't able to say those final words. He says you should read the words, V'kimat she'omala shelo nishchat. That he almost had said the words that he wasn't shechted. But he was unable to get those words out and it was too late. She had already died. And this is, of course, it just compounds the tragedy. This compounds all the tragedy. This compounds the tragedy because this is the sense. And this is, to balance this, what we said before, the idea that Sarah lives this a rich and rewarding life, and she has a life that is full, and it is, and she lives out her years and the years that are given to her in advance, and the gift of life, etc., etc. And then we have all of the components of the challenge of the finality of life, because the Midrash is conveying, in one sense, that there's never enough time. And the idea that Sarah's life is suddenly cut short, and there's never enough time, and people are never able to do all the things they wish they would have been able to do. And Sarah passes away, in a way, at a moment of shock, when if only there was the if only. The if only is there. If only the Mashliach, the agent, had been able to just complete the sentence, maybe she would have survived. So, if you like, and by the way, you see the same as one more source on this point, which is the final one of the pages, the Orach Chaim. The Orach Chaim tells us that when it says that Abraham came to eulogize Sarah and to mourn for her, there's a lot of discussion about those two words, because they seem to be in the wrong order. Really, it should say he wept for her, then he eulogized her. Lots of discussion about that. Let's look at just the very first line. Perush, this means, the explanation is, L'Sarah, he came to eulogize Sarah, Shemesa min ha'olam, that she died. The idea that the idea of eulogizing her because she had died, V'liv kosa, and to weep for her, L'tzad ma shenechsar behedera, and that which was missing with her absence. Right? Ne'edar means there's something absent there. There is an absence there. This is a very subtle difference, but a vital one. There is the sense of mourning for her. That means to say her presence is no longer here. She is on the death itself, on her passing. But then there's the void. That's the weeping. The weeping is that there's a void left. Nechsa, chaser. Now the world is lacking. Now the world doesn't have this righteous person in the world anymore. So we have all the components, as we said, of the challenge of finality of life, and the idea that there's never enough time, and the idea of what it means to realize there's an absence. But then, of course, you turn to the very next verse. Let's see the pasuk before we see the next source. And if you look what it says, the next pasuk is an amazing pasuk. Very simple, and in one of these pasukim that you will just pass over unless you have an eye and we take a stop and understand 1 second, what is the Torah telling me here? Pasuk Gimel. So we've seen, right? The second, we've seen all the first two pasukim. What's the third one? Vayokom Avraham me'al pnei Moshe. What does Avram do next? He weeps and he cries and he eulogizes, and then Vayokom. The next word is he gets up. He gets up. That's the next word. Vayokom Avraham me'al pnei Moshe. The next thing he does what Jews have always done. They get up. They get up. Why? Because there's something to do. There's a mission now. What is the mission? The mission immediately is to ensure that she has a dignified burial. Vayokom Avraham. Avraham gets up. Vayidaber el bnei ches. And he speaks to the people. He says, who's around? Who's here? I need to find a place to bury her. So that word Vayokom is a very powerful word because Avraham is able to get up. He's able to focus on continuity, on what comes next. And then here we have, once again, a great puzzle. And the puzzle is linked to the item that we discussed, the idea that we discussed at the very end of last week's shir. And this is a theme you can trace through Bereshis, very interesting, through all of these parshiot, and that is the puzzle of Yitzchak. Yitzchak is a puzzle from beginning to end. When he's there, when he's not there, what he says, what he doesn't say, and here again, Yitzchak is completely absent. Have you noticed? Completely absent. Where is Yitzchak? Why is he not involved in the burial of his mother? Why is he not mentioned? Why is he not mourning together with Avraham? It's a question. Rabbeinu Bachya asked the question, others do as well, of course, and he says like this. Venerally, it needs to be further, it's in the middle of a much longer piece, this is source 5. Ki hoya hakosav roy sheyomar, that the pasuk should have said, Vayovoy Avraham v'Yitzchak, lispod l'sara v'livko. It should have said that Avraham and Yitzchak came to weep and to mourn for Sarah. Ki b'vadai, because certainly, roy hoya Yitzchak lispod le'imoy hatzadekes, obviously, Yitzchak should weep and mourn for his mother, the righteous woman, Sarah. He has a much greater obligation than Avraham.
But Yitzchak disappears much earlier.
Pardon?
Yitzchak disappears much earlier.
Yeah, we mentioned last week's shir. No, we mentioned that. That's what I referred to. That's what I referred to. He's going to come to that as well. He's going to mention it, and that's what we spoke about at the end of last week's shir. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll come to it. Yeah. The disappearance of Yitzchak, you're absolutely correct. So the obligation should rest on Yitzchak to mourn to a greater extent than even his father. And furthermore, she loved him so much. This incredible birth, the miraculousness of his birth. And her soul was bound up together with his soul. And how can it be that he is absent? And you're going to say to me perhaps, well, we know he's there, but the Torah should mention it. When we're talking about that sense of emotion and the feeling and the idea that there is a weeping and mourning, etc., etc., it should be there. So what is his answer? His suggestion is as follows. Aviyotochin lomed is possible. Second paragraph. Unbelievable. He says it could be the Yitzchak has no idea. The Yitzchak does not know that his mother has passed away. If we follow the path of the sages and the idea and the concept that she passed away through the tragedy of hearing about the Akedah itself, the binding of Isaac, it would stand to reason that there would also be a need to not let him know why she had passed away, because that news could have been absolutely devastating and shocking for him. Maybe there was a need to tell him at a later date. I'm not going to go into the ethics of that, of the potential ethics of not revealing what he might have wanted to know. That's not the point. The point is that his suggestion is that it was in his best interest that he wasn't told. And for this reason he says, we do not find, we don't see, that is why Yitzchak is not mentioned, neither in her death, not when she's buried, and we do not find that he is mentioned from the moment that he is bound on the altar. This is what we mentioned last week. When they went to Mount Moriah, it says on the return Vayashav Avraham el Na'arov. What does it say? It says Avraham returned to his lads. And if you remember, we gave several different ideas and concepts. We talked about last week, we discussed the idea that perhaps this is one way of understanding this, is conveying the concept that the Akedah is never truly solved. That means the paradox and the puzzle of the Akedah is never solved. The idea that the greatest test of all is, how could it be that Avram knows that his son must survive, yet is told that he won't? And that is the greatest test of all, because he knows what the outcome must be, yet he's told to go against that. And we discussed this last week. Either way, we see that Yitzchak is absent. And it should say, Vayashuvu el hana'orim, they returned. But the return of Isaac is not mentioned. Then he suggests, it's possible, it's possible he remains on Mount Moriah for 3 years. Doesn't say how he was sustained there, but maybe there were people who helped him. Until he reaches the age of 40, Vanosa Rivka, and then he marries Rivka. And that is why Yitzchak does not reappear in the story until the servant brings back Rivka at the end of the parsha. That comma is a mistake. And then the verse mentions him, and it says that Yitzchak comes from this, from going to Be'er Lachayroi, from that well. And what is interesting about this explanation, of course, is that what we find at the end of the parsha, which we'll come to hopefully later on, we see that it says in chapter 24, verse 63, Samach Gimel, it's a very long parak. Most of the parsha basically one. Most of the parsha is one parak. It says, "Vayitze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh lefnos erev." The Yitzchak goes out to speak lasuach basadeh, from where we understand and learn that is tefillah exactly. And what is the sadeh? Yitzchak calls Mount Moriah sadeh. So there is this link there to the idea that he was connected there still to the Har HaMoriah, Mount Moriah itself. Okay, so this is the idea. This is the suggestion. This is the explanation of Rabbeinu Bachya. So what he's done is he's solved for us pshat. He's explained how it is and why it is that Yitzchak is absent. It could be because he doesn't know and he's not aware and he's not familiar with what is going on at this stage. But why? The question is why? How do we understand that? What is the depth of meaning behind that? Maybe we can suggest that the depth of this idea is as follows. The passing of Sarah, that completion, the finality, as we said before, could represent the end of an era. It is always a huge challenge when a great leader, a great figure passes away, that there is a challenge of saying, what is next? The idea of perhaps that's it. It will never be the same again. And people often, throughout the whole history of humanity, have often fallen into that trap. That sense of, that's it. It will never be recreated. We will never recreate the glory days, how things used to be. Yitzchak has to represent the next step. That is what Yitzchak has to stand for. He has to be that continuity. He has to be the next part of the story. That's his role. And therefore, he is absent from this part of the story. He is absent from this whole section that deals with the end, the passing of Sarah, because with Yitzchak, the focus is on the future. And the question is, how do we get there? How do we get to that sense of continuity? What is the pathway there? Before we get to Yitzchak and reintroducing Yitzchak to the story, the central role of the parsha, and the central story of the parsha, of course, is taken up by Eliezer, by the Eved Avram, the servant of Avram, who goes to find a wife for Yitzchak and finds Rivka. Lots of different approaches and avenues we could take here. Let's just take out one idea, which I think is probably representative of a number of different aspects in the role of Eliezer and the lessons it teaches us. Look at chapter 24, verse 39. Perek Chof Daled, Pasuk Lamed Tes. Okay, I've got the Rashi for you there, but if you want to see the Pasuk inside. This is in the section where the Eved, the servant, is recounting to the household, to Suel and Lavan, etc., what has happened. Yeah? He tells the whole story, is recounted again. Are you familiar? The sages say, why is that? And how precious the words of the servants of the Avot, and how precious their words are, and that's why it's repeated. Okay. Then when he comes to that passage, what does it say? He says that my master may make an oath that I will not take a wife from the daughters of the Benot Knaani, so Imnoel Beis Avi Telech, etc. Voimar el Adoni. I said to my master, Ulai lo selech Isha acharoi. Perhaps this Isha, this woman, will not follow me. And he said to me, Hashem said, then Avram said, Hashem, who has gone before, which I've walked in front of him, he will look after you. Don't worry, you will be successful essentially in your mission. And if not, he says, you'll be absolved of your oath, absolved of your oath. Rashi says, that picks up on the fact that the word is written Aleph Lamed Yud, which means Eli. Eli, to me, says Rashi, Eli Kesiv, number 6, it is written the word Eli to me. Bas Hoyasolo Eliezer. Eliezer had a daughter. He wanted to find a pretext, Sheyomelo Avraham, that Avraham would say to him, Lifnos Elov, to turn to him, Lahasio Bito, to marry his own daughter. Amala Avram said to him, Beni Baruch, my son is blessed, V'ata Oror, and you are cursed, V'ein Oror Midabek Bebaruch. And someone who is cursed cannot attach to someone who is blessed. Although Eliezer is a faithful servant to Avraham, he is descended from those who were cursed originally by Noach, and he says it is impossible to create a marriage union between your daughter and my son. The question which is asked here, let's have a look on the next page, because I'm going to go through the piece of Rav Shimon Schwab on this, which is not the only one who asked. Shimon Schwab, we've quoted on a number of occasions. He was the Rav in Washington Heights, in Breuer's Shul, the Yekesher Shul in Washington Heights in New York. He says, he asked the question, he quotes the Rashi, number 7, and he says that this word Eli is written here without the Vav, and that's where Rashi makes the comment. Although we read it Ulai, perhaps, really, the Eved says it's written Eli to me. The question is, if you look at Perek Chavdalat Pasukei, right in the beginning of the chapter, just have a look at the verse a second, you find that when he's given the instruction, and he actually asked the question to Avraham, what does it say there? Vayomer Elov ha'eved. Yeah, the Eved said to him, to Avraham, Ulai, perhaps, perhaps the woman will not want to go after me. Now, if it was the case that he had self-interest, you would expect the words to be written Aleph Lamed Yud at that point. Yeah, we read it either way the same, right? But the nuance and the details in every single verse and pronunciation and letters missing, whatever, we pick up on everything. Why is it not written that way here? When he makes the statement, it should say there, Ulai, Eli, to me, because if that's what he really wanted. That's his question. And others ask that question as well. Look what the third paragraph down, and we'll see his answer. Venira Pashat, third paragraph in the right-hand column. It would seem obvious, he says, Sheba Ulai Horishon, that on the first Ulai, his intent was not clear. Shaharei Sha'al Ke'inyan, because he asked appropriately. He asked in the right way. Aval Achakach, afterwards, Keshekvaro, when he already saw Shetzliach Hashem Darko, when he saw that Hashem had made him way successful, and he already saw that things were going in the right way. Why? Because he knows the water and Yidrivka and everything else, the signs, and he's there, and she's the one. So he's already now relating the story to Lavan, to Besuel and Lavan. Loma siper hasfekus she'ulai lo sever. Why did he relate the question? Why did he say at that point that my master said to me, maybe she won't? I said to my master, maybe she won't want to come with me. He's already giving him an opening to refuse to give her. He's saying, I made the suggestion. He's planting the idea in their heads. I made the suggestion that maybe she won't want to come. They could have easily jumped up at that moment and said, okay, yeah, well, we don't. We see from there that he had some vested interest. The fact that he raised it, and that is why it is written the word Eli to me. There's a very beautiful interpretation, because it means that he's extended the way Chazal, the sages, notice the nuance of the fact that it's written without a vav. And he said, look at the wider context, and you see why they pick it up here. They pick it up here because although Eliezer is relating the whole story, this component of the story was unnecessary to mention from any perspective. It was completely unnecessary for him to say that I had a discussion with Avraham that you might say no. Why would he raise that? He wants her to be successful unless he has some vested interest. Look at the next paragraph. He says, what does it mean that he's included in Arur, the sense of a curse? Shemisha b'chlal baruch. What is the definition of baruch, of being blessed? Someone who is in the position of being blessed. Biyodo l'salei kol negiyosov v'levatel es ha'ani shelo. The definition of blessed, being baruch, is being able to remove vested interests, to remove the ani, to understand that it's not about me, to understand that what I'm doing is not about me and it's about the bigger picture. And to do it only because it's the will of Hashem. Let's not forget that he was a great person. He'd achieved tremendous things. He learned a lot from Avram. We call it Dole or Mashke Metoras Rabbi. He was able to draw from the wellsprings of his master. He saw the wonders of Hashem. We're not putting down Eliezer completely. We're saying he achieved great things. There was a certain amount that he hadn't been able to nullify, that sense of vested interest, the sense of ani. The final paragraph, which you don't have so long to go into, but if you are familiar with the book of Ruth, right, Sefer Ruth, you will see this is the left-hand column here. Maybe I just summarize it outside. He has the most magnificent interpretation over one of the most puzzling things about the book of Ruth. If you look at the book of Ruth in a Megillah, the original text, right, not in a Chumash but in a Megillah, there are certain words that don't appear, but we read them. There's a few of them that we read them. According to this, it's called Kriya and Ketiv. You have this a lot in Tanakh. Where a word is written in a certain way, the Masoretic tradition is to read it in a different way. Okay, but in the book of Ruth, there are words, a few words that are not there at all. And if you're laning it from a Megillah, you have to remember to insert them, because there's a tradition to insert the word. And one of those words is the word Eli, to me. So it says, the Pasuk says in the book of Ruth, this is in chapter 3, verse 5. I'll just summarize what he says. Vatomer Eleha, she says to her, that means she says to Naomi, when Naomi gives her the mission to go to the field that is owned by Boaz, it says, Kol asher tomar Eli e'aseh. Whatever you say to me, e'aseh I will do. Now Eli is read, but it's not written. It doesn't appear in the actual Megillah. The tradition is that we read it, but it's not said, it's not written. What is that hinting? That even though it's demonstrating how little vested interest Ruth actually has. Even though her entire future is dependent on this moment. If she is unable to fulfill the words of Naomi, if she's unable to arrange the meeting with Boaz, she has no future. Her entire future is dependent on this. Nevertheless, she did it without any personal interest. And that's why the word Eli is not mentioned. So that it's written, Kol asher tomar e'aseh. Whatever you say, I will do. We insert the word Eli, to me. But the fact that it's not written is demonstrating that she had no vested interest. No, she said to her mother-in-law, I will do it because you told me to do it, not because it's for my sake, even though it was her entire future rested on it. Just a beautiful interpretation of the Megillah. But we're going back to Chayei now. So let us turn over to the next page here. So we've understood something very important from this idea of Reb Shimon Schwab. And let's summarize what it is. What is the message here? What is the message here? To be a person who is defined as Baruch, as blessed, one has to be able to work on removing the vested interest. It is the absence of self-interest, to broaden it out, which carries forward the mission of Sarah Imenu. Of Sarah. That's what carries forward the mission. Even when everything is at stake, like the example from Ruth, everything is at stake. You still have to be able to root out vested interest. You have to be able to do it only for the sake of the mission and the purpose and what it ultimately rests on. And that's what we learn from the story of Eliezer. That's what we learn from it. This attribute ultimately finds its way, the same attribute, into the bracha, the blessing that is given to Rivka. So if we go forward now to chapter 23, verse 60. So right at the end, Pasuk Samach, right? 24. My mistake. 24. Sorry, my mistake. 24. Chof Dalet. Right. Chof Dalet Pasuk Samach. What does it say? They bless Rivka when she agrees to go. She says, I will go. They ask Rivka, will you go? And she says, I will go. And they give her a bracha. What bracha do they give her? Our sister, At Hayil al Feir. You should be like thousands of myriads. V'yirash zarech, that's a large number. V'yirash zarech, eis shar soinov. And your descendants shall inherit the gate of their enemies. This beautiful phrase, this blessing we give to this day. Every Jewish kala receives this blessing before she goes to the chuppah. At the moment of the bedekin, we give this bracha. Ati yil alfei revah. The bracha given to the first kala. Ati yil alfei revah. Now, this is a difficult phrase to translate. You shall be la alfei revava. What exactly that means? You shall be two la alfei. La alfei revava is an unusual grammatical construct, right? Your descendants shall be, alfei revava. However you want to construct it, it's an unusual way to phrase it. And then also, what is the reference to enemies and the gates and the shar? So we do have a parallel pasuk. We have a parallel verse, which appears where? It's a good quiz question. Where does it appear? It wasn't that long ago. The Akedah. Yeah, the Akedah. There you are. Right. What does it say in the Akedah? Let's turn back. Pasuk Chav, Perek Chav Beis Pasuk Yud Zayin. Yeah, 22 verse 17. It says Avram is given a bracha. What is the blessing? Hivarech avorechecha. I will bless you. V'harba arbeh zarecha. I will increase your descendants. Kechoich ve'ashumayim, like the stars of the heavens. This is after the Akedah. V'kachol hashal svasayom, like the sea, those by the seashore. V'yirash zarech eis shar oivov. Almost exactly the same words. Almost, yeah. V'yirash zarech shar sonov. There's one is oivov, enemies, and one is a different phrase. Those who hate. Soneh is someone who hates, but it's pretty much the same thing. So there must be a link, obviously, right, between the two. Promise given to Avram and the blessing given to Rivka. So the Kli Yakar, who, as we know, we've mentioned many times, 17th century, Rav of Prague, beautiful pathways in Chumash and explanations, and so beautiful to read what he says. Let's look at what he says. Number 8. Gamla Avraham, he says, Ne'ema loshen zeh, v'yirash zareich shar oivov. To Avram as well was said this phrase: your descendants shall inherit the gate of their enemies. Because this is the measure. This is how it works. This is the reward. With any people who are able to do kindness to this extent, what happens when a person is good at doing kindness? They get a lot of friends. They make a lot of friends. People gravitate around them. That is, nothing's changed. It's exactly the same now. That if a person is good, has goodwill, and goes out of themselves to just do good and be kind, what happens? People surround them. People come. They want to be friends with them. And he brings the pasuk in Mishlei. The pasuk in Mishlei says, "Rabim yichalu pnei nadiv." Many people will sort of want to entreat the face of the benefactor. V'chol horea leish matan, which means all friends go to the giver of gifts. People who are nice and kind and give things out, people want to associate them. V'Avram hayol gomel chesed lakol. Avram was someone who did kindness to everyone. Lakrovim v'larechokim, to those who are near, those who are far. V'chein Rivka, so too Rivka did the same. She was someone who epitomized giving. Al Kain, therefore, the derech teva yirshu shar oivehem. They will inherit the gate of their enemies. The link is there because the bracha fits. The blessing fits because it will naturally happen. It's a bracha which will be fulfilled through their own actions. It's not just let's hope it happens. It's saying because you have this midah, because you're so kind, people will come with you. So whenever you're in trouble and difficulty and pain, what's going to happen? People are going to stand with you. Like we saw with Avram. We discussed this in Lech Lecha. Ba'ali bris Avram, the people who were his friends, they were his close, they appreciated him, they respected him, and therefore they defended him. As it says, and he brings the Gemara Chazal that supports this. So that's the first one he makes. The idea, by the way, of the gate is also very significant because what is the gate? And actually, I think this is the first reference, the first time in Tanakh. The word Sha'ar appears, I think is after the Akedah at this moment, the word Sha'ar, gate. But we know in antiquity, in the ancient world, the gate was a very significant place. We know this from other places in Tanakh as well. Things happened at the gate. People were judged at the gate. That was where the Beis Din would sit, right? And other things happened at the gate of the city. What does the gate represent? The gate represents the interface. It's the place where key ideas happen, where thought leadership happens, the place of judgment. As we said, the prophets would prophesy at the gate, the Nevi'im. It was much more than just the way into the city. The gate represents the boundary. It's the boundary between the values we hold dear within the walls and the outside world. That's the gate is very, very highly symbolic.
It says a lot by the gate.
Does it say there gate as well? Okay, so then maybe it didn't before.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Right,
Yeah.
so then Shah's okay. Maybe it's the first time it refers to the gate in this sort of context, the kind of the gate of the enemies. Okay, very good. So anyway, this is the idea. So look at the next paragraph now. Skip to the next paragraph. Lefichach, therefore. So skip the next bit and go to the next paragraph. Therefore, they said to her, and with this he says we can understand this unusual bracha. Amrullah, they said to her, Hayi la'alfei revava. You should be to thousands of myriads. He asked the question, he says, is that a finality to the bracha? What is actually the bracha here? Anyone who has children, has descendants, eventually they're going to have a lot of descendants, right? It's a multiplier effect. Please God, if those children have children, and those children have children, and they have children, and you count 20 generations, And there's already a lot of people. So what was exactly the blessing? Saying you'll have many descendants. He says they wasn't talking. The answer is, he says, I just want to summarize, we don't have so long. He says it wasn't talking about the descendants. They already knew they would have, there was a bracha already given to Avraham that he would have many descendants. That's not the meaning of this bracha. Skip a few lines. What is this word lamed? La alfei, to the alfei, to the thousands. Ela sha'omru, the bracha they gave her was as follows. The blessing was, Yihiratzon, may it be as well, Shetizke, that you should merit, lehitiv, to do good, v'ligmol chesed, la alfei revava. You should merit to do kindness to thousands of people. That's what it means. Beautiful interpretation. At hayi la alfei revava. Carry on doing what you're doing to thousands of people. That was the blessing they gave her. Ki yiyeh rav chelech. You'll have a lot of strength to do that. And through that, you're going to have many friends. And as a result, the automatical result will be that your enemies will be dealt with. Because all those people will club with you when you need them. They will stand with you. Many people will stand to support you when you go out to war, etc., etc. And this interpretation, we'll leave the rest of it, this interpretation, apart from it, it's such a beautiful explanation of the verse. They're saying, you are a person who does kindness. That's how she's identified by Eliezer in the first place, with the well and the water, etc. And her family say to her, the blessing we give you is, At hayila alfei revava. May you be someone who does this same thing to thousands of people, and then they will always stand with you. And the message, of course, is that we have to do the right thing. As a people, as a nation, as Jews, we will always face enemies. That's the reality. We will always face enemies, but if we do the right thing, if we make a Kiddush Hashem, if we sanctify Hashem's name, if we make sure that we go out of our way to do kindness and chesed to other people, good people will always stand with us. There will always be people who will stand with us against our enemies. At the place we meet them at the gate, they will stand with us. That is the natural consequence. And that is what the bracha they gave to Rivka. So this is the idea, and this is the result of being selfless, of being someone who is gomel chesed, who does kindness. And that's a beautiful interpretation of how we understand Rivka. Now we finally come back to Yitzchak. What does it say? I've got just a few more brief sources here. Look at I've reproduced the pasuk here, so you don't need to look it up. Vayavia Yitzchak ha'oyla Sarah imo, source 9. Yitzchak brings her to the tent of Sarah his mother. Vayikach es Rivka, and he takes Rivka vatihilo leisha. Vayehaveha, and he takes her as a wife, and he loves her. Vayinochem Yitzchak achrei imo, and Yitzchak is then comforted after his mother. Let's come back to the ship of Theseus, the ship of Theseus. In the 17th century, in 1656 actually, the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes writes a book called Of Identity and Difference. And he takes this idea, this concept of the ship of Theseus to another stage. He says like this, what happens if all of the people who are repairing the ship of Theseus take all those bits of wood and they discard them? And someone else comes along and picks up all the pieces of wood and decides to build another ship with the same old pieces of wood. Whereas the people who discarded them, they take new pieces of wood for their ship. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? That was his next, the step in this logical kind of mind game. What is the next? Which one is the real ship of Theseus? Is it the material that was discarded which made a ship? Or was it the original ship that was built? And of course, the idea behind this paradox, this question is, of course, that there are two possible definitions of identity. That's what he was getting at. There are two definitions of identity. You can base the identity around form or matter. The ship that the Athenians rebuild has the same form as the original ship, but it hasn't got the same matter because they had to replace the boards. The ship that's being built by what is known as the custodians, that's what I think he calls it, the custodians, they take the material, but it's not the same form. They just use the pieces. Which one is the real ship? Now look at what Rashi says on this pasuk, and you'll see what I mean. Rashi says, Ha'oyala Sarah imo, they bring her to Sarah, his mother's tent. Vayiviyah ha'oyala, Rashi says, he brings her into the tent, v'na'ases, and she becomes dugmas Sarah imo. Dugmat Sarah imo. She becomes the model, the image, dugma, of Sarah, his mother. Klomar, as if to say, and he goes further, v'harei hi Sarah imo. She is Sarah, his mother. And we know, Rashi goes on to say, whenever Sarah was alive, there was a candle burning from Erev Shabbat to Erev Shabbat, there was a blessing in the dough, etc. There was the cloud tied over the tent. And when she died, they stopped. When Rivka came, they returned. Is it really the same tent or is it a different tent? Targum Onkelos says, last line, that Yitzchak brings her lemashkana to the tent, v'chazan saw v'ho taknin ovadoho. Her actions were as profound and good and ready and proper as ka'evodei Sarah imei. She behaved in the same way, she had the same personality as Sarah, his mother. Is it really the same tent? I think we can say that the answer is that it was like that ship which the Athenians rebuilt. It has the same form. It is the same thing. V'harei Sarah imo. There are lots of different people who have different approaches to this paradox. But it could be that what we're understanding here is that it is the same ship. It is the same tent. Why? Because it has the same form. It has the same form. And this is the continuity. That is what makes her values infinite. That is what makes it infinite. That is what makes Sarah continue living. And Yitzchak, as we mentioned before, has been absent. Yitzchak is removed from the story. Perhaps, as we suggested, because Yitzchak is the focus on the next stage. He can't focus on the passing of Sarah because he has to recreate the next generation. But he himself also is not able to do that until he is able to see that manifestation of the values of Sarah. It's not about the material, it's about exactly the same form, it's about exactly the same approach in life. And therefore, what do we see at the end of this verse? Vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo. What does that mean? Yitzchak is comforted after his mother. I'm now nervous to say, is this the last time we say comforted? Is this the first time we see someone is comforted after someone passing away? It's definitely not the first case, though. Now, the word nechama is mentioned in the Torah. Whereas the first case, the word nechama is mentioned in the Torah. End of Bereshis. End of Bereshis. End of Bereshis. In what context? Right at the end of Bereshis, what does Hashem say? Vayinochem Hashem ki asa es ha'adam ba'aretz. Which means what? Not comfort. He regrets. Yeah? So to speak, if you can say that with Hashem. Right? Vayinochem is a sense of change. Vayinachem Hashem ki asa es ha'adam ba'aretz. Reb Tzadok HaKohen, who was a great Hasidic thinker, says as follows. What is the connection between change, this idea of regret, so to speak? Hashem is regretting, so to speak, that he hasn't created man because of what he's done wrong. That's the end of Bereshit, introduction to the flood. What is the connection between comfort to someone who, God forbid, has lost someone precious to them and the idea of change? Because ultimately, there isn't really comfort because the person is still not there. The absence is there. The void is there. How you can never fill that void. So how can you ever comfort someone? The answer is, a person is comforted when they're able to see the situation in a different way. When they're able to see it in a different way. That's what nechama really means. It means change. When they're able to shift their own perspective. They will never change the reality. You can't comfort someone with changing the reality because the reality is here. The reality is fixed. But you can change a perspective. And the ability to reach a stage of nechama of some sort is to realize that life has continuity. That's the change. And that is Vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo. That is what Yitzchak does. At this moment, Yitzchak undergoes a metamorphosis. Are you with me? He undergoes a change. It's not that he suddenly sees Rivka is here, so now he's comforted that his mother has passed away. He's now got a new life. No, he's now able to change his own perspective. He's now able to realize that it is the same tent. V'harei Sarah imo, it is the same tent. That there is a continuity. And it might be that his circumstances have changed. The material has changed. Like the ship, right? The ship's material has changed, but it's the same ship. That's the answer. And I think that is one way how we can understand how the beginning of the parsha so beautifully matches the end of the parsha. We have Sarah Imenu representing the passing of Sarah and seemingly the end of the road. There's a finality there. But Yitzchak remains out of sight. The journey that we go on with the finding of a wife for Yitzchak is a finding of the values that Sarah stands for. That's what it is. And we highlighted that through the Eliezer's role in the sense that there is this self-interest, but we remove that completely in order to look at Rivka as a character of entirely chesed, entirely kindness, to the extent that her own family, who had nothing to do with Avram, they're not going on this journey, but the blessing they can give her must be because they've seen that in her life. At hayila ve'ruvah, carry on doing it, they say to her. You carry on showering other people with kindness, and they will always defend you. They will stand with you. And Yitzchak is vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo. Yitzchak is able to appreciate and understand and value what he has been through as a person, how he's been able to shift his focus, and that is how he is able to understand there is true and deep and meaningful continuity. Shabbat shalom. We have to turn it.